When we model, we need to take our primitive objects and reshape them into the forms that we want. Now, typically in Maya, we do this by manipulating what are called components. Now, there are three types of components in Maya. So I'm going to go ahead and select this chair. And if I right-click above it, you'll see that we get this marking menu. And the important components that you want to look at are vertex, edge, and face. So let's take a look at those one at a time. So if I go into vertex mode, you'll see that these are the points that define the object. And we can select these by just marquee selecting or individually selecting them. Now if I right-click again and go into edge mode, you'll see that we get now the lines that are between the vertices. So this is an edge. If I right-click again, we get faces. Now faces are actually the geometry defined by the edges, and so usually they're four-sided or three-sided shapes. They can be more, but typically most models try to limit to 3 or 4. Now we can select, move, and manipulate any one of these or any combination of these in Maya. So for example, I could select all of these faces and hit my move tool and I can move them. I'm going to go ahead and undo that. Now when we start to work with components, selecting those components is very important. And so there are a number of tools for selection. The first one is just selecting the components themselves. So we can select them one at a time, or if we hold down Shift, we can multiple select them. We can also continue to hold down Shift and deselect them. Now another way to select is to select between two rows of vertices or faces. So for example, if I click on this face here and Shift double click, it selects everything in between those. And that works for just about anything. So if I go into vertex, I could select that one and double click here and it'll select all of these vertices. And if we go into edge mode, we can do the same. Select this one, double click, and it selects all of those. Now edges are a special case. So if you select an edge and double click on it, it selects what's called an edge loop. Now these are important for modeling because they really define the outline of an object. So if I were to click on this vertical edge and double click on it, you can see that I can select those edge loops. And I can also hold down Shift and double click to select multiple edge loops. Now when you're working with vertices and faces, you can also select loops, but it's a little bit different. So if I go into vertex mode and select this vertex, what I need to do is select one vertex adjacent to it. So if I select this one and I Shift double click on this, it will select all of those. If I select this one and I Shift double click above it, it'll select a vertical row. Now the same thing happens for faces. So I can select the face, Shift double click, and there we go. So again, you have to go with adjacent faces, either directly above or directly to the left or right. So if I double click below here, Shift, double click above, or Shift, double click to the left or right, you can see how we are selecting loops. Now another way to select is to grow and shrink your selection. Now I'm going to do this with vertices. So I'm going to right click and go into vertex mode here. So let's say I'm trying to select the upper corner of this, and maybe I can only grab a few vertices. Now, if we use the greater than and less than sign on the keyboard, we can grow and shrink. So if I hit Shift and then greater than, I can grow my selection. Less than reduces it. So if I were to select a whole bunch of vertices here, I could reduce that or expand that just by hitting greater than and less than. And this also works for faces and edges. So those are some common ways to select components in Maya. So go ahead and practice with these tools because you're going to be using these a lot as you start to sculpt and model your objects.